Welcome to Il Salotto Sessions, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of design with leading architects, designers, and industry experts. I'm your host, Sara Seravalli, and I'm thrilled to take you on this journey through the ever-evolving landscape of design and architecture. Let me share a bit about my background. I spent 16 enriching years in Milan, the capital of design, where I was deeply involved in showrooms and events not just in Milan, but also in Paris and London. In 2011, I made a pivotal move to London when I was hired by one of the specification market's main players to establish the new showroom in Clerkenwell. In 2013, my journey brought me to Scotland, where I founded Design Pop-Up. This initiative quickly gained traction and became a cornerstone in Glasgow and Manchester's design communities, and by 2018 we also expanded to Dublin. However, as the market evolved, I decided to refocus our efforts on Scotland. This led to the birth of Il Salotto, a new venture aimed at creating a virtual and physical space for meaningful conversations and insights into the specification market. Join us as we explore trends, share bios, and uncover the stories behind the creative minds shaping our world. In this episode, we dive into the critical topic of social housing with industry experts Donna, Milton, and Tom Barclay, both of whom are also fellow judges for the Herald Property Awards. Together, we explore the profound implications of constructing high-quality homes versus substandard ones, examining how these choices affect communities and the broader housing market. We'll also discuss the evolving Scottish demographics and their impact on housing demand, as well as the rising building cost and the unique challenges facing the sector today. Join us for an insightful conversation on the future of housing in Scotland. Hello there. For this new episode of Il Salotto Sessions, I'm here with Tom Barclay and Donna Milton. Tom Barclay is the new Chief Exec of Kingdom Housing Association, and Donna is the MD for Arnall Johnson. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tom is also our very strict boss, chair at the Herald Property Awards, is the chair of the judging panel. Donna and I were being in the judging panel more or less same time. Donna, weren't we? Yeah.
Yep, I think so.
So we had our judging day, which was the usual very interesting battle where we all fight to get our favorite projects through the line to get an award. It's been harder than usual because Tom was very strict and we weren't allowed to give any commendations out. But you too pushed very, very, very hard for one specific project in a very high quality and busy category, which is affordable housing. So because this episode is going to be published after the awarding ceremony, we can say that the beautiful Burns Road housing development in Cumbernauld by Collective Architecture is the winner of this year Herald Property Awards. Can you both went to see it. Why were you so enamored with it? Donna, ladies first.
Thanks, Sarah. I think it's probably one of the most impressive affordable housing developments I've seen in the awards. And actually, that's a massive accolade because usually all of the entries are extremely high quality. I thought everything about it was quite exceptional. I thought the house type design and the housing design was really impressive, given the fact that it was a really complicated site that had really, really challenging topography. So they created a kind of art design with a big deck access block that created gable ends to give things character and each block a sense of identity. And they thought really cleverly about how they could use a really, really tricky site to create, I suppose, a sense of community. From each block, you would essentially be able to see the entire development, but also to take advantage from the upper levels of things like the Campsie Hills and the type of views that would be provided. The housing itself was really, really high quality in terms of its specification and the materials, but the public realm I thought was quite exceptional. I think they had just made an extremely clever set of choices about how to encourage active play, social spaces for community interaction. They created a green space in a very urban environment, and as soon as I drove in and had a look at it, for me it was just a wow.
Tom, adding
How can
anything to this?
how can I follow that? That's just so unfair. Anyway, and I'm not going to try to not repeat anything that Donna said there, and I completely agree with all of it. Cumbernauld is a place declared a new town in 1955. I think elements of Cumbernauld and its fabric do not give you the wow factor, shall we say, and I'm not being discrediting to architecture of the time, but it was architecture of the time. This is architecture of today. You know, when I first saw the site, drove round the corner, absolute wow factor. There's been a scale of bravery here on a really difficult site, as Donna said. And I think for the purposes of creating new places in what are ostensibly older places, this is a marker for a standard for placemaking that we should all kind of sit up and take notice of. Very brave architecturally, but very focused on customers. And, you know, for someone who's been involved in this game for a wee while now, I have to say hats off to everyone that was involved in the project.
So it's not really just about giving very good quality accommodation to families and people that need extra assistance and things like that. But also, in this case, it's very much more a regeneration of the area as well, isn't it?
I'll go first this time, Donna, if that's okay. Absolutely so. I think if you look at what the design team through the client, in this case Sanctuary Group, had to work with, not only was there the huge levels issue, but you also had, you know, a multi-storey car park, multi-storey living, a road, an urbanised road network, an underpass. There were more imponderables there in creating a great place than you would wish to have in any residential scheme if you were starting from scratch. And therefore, what they have achieved as a result, despite those barriers, is something that feels safe, looks modern, has a big focus on sustainability, but probably more importantly, you know, we were sitting in some customers' homes where they talked about it being a place that they wanted to stay forever. And, you know, it's very, very rare that you get that level of feedback from a customer, even in a new build context. They're always half looking out the window at the next thing. That this seemed to be a self-contained place that has become part of what I'm sure in even 20 years from now will be an acceptable standard of living that we want to aspire to.
So this year, I am a big fan, based on what you're just saying now, I'm a big fan also of Renfrewshire Council and what they're doing with the housing in areas like Johnston and Paisley, Ferguson Park. So for the property awards, I started going to see affordable housing a few years back. And at the beginning, I thought, oh, this is a bit boring. But then in reality, yes, I know, don't pull those eyes at me. But in reality, I very quickly understood how important their job is. And one of the things that comes out quite regularly in our chats and meetings is that social housing now is so much more appealing and desirable than some of those private developments that are there. Donna, don't you think so?
I agree. I think, you know, over the past 5 years, we've seen some exceptional entries, both in terms of really clever housing design, but as Tom said, in terms of placemaking. I think in particular, social landlords will always have an eye on that. Essentially, they're building an asset that they're going to be managing over a significant period of time, 20, 30, 40, you know, up to 60 years and beyond. So it's crucial that you create an environment which will enable a community to thrive. And they'll also be thinking about things like, how do we create sustainable communities? So how do we create a housing mix that's going to attract a range of different households into this development and into this community and enable all of them to live well in that community? So I think absolutely housing design in the social housing sector has always been strong because the award of grant is contingent on meeting really quite rigorous standards. But I think there's been a massive focus, maybe actually since the focus on place within the National Housing Strategy, Housing to 2040, the whole achievement of placemaking, I think, increasingly in social housing is something that sets it apart. And I think that Burns Road is a fantastic example of that.
Yeah, one of the conversations I had one in my visits is exactly as you say. They are building houses that have quite a long lifespan, because then it's the best use of the public money. Instead of building a house that lasts 5 years, they're building houses that last 50, 60 years. And then they're investing into, as Tom said, sustainability and new technologies, because then, as you guys said, is something that they need to work with for the next 5 decades. There has been some news in the papers over the last few years that some of the private developers, we don't name names, is not the point here, but is you go buy a house and within 2 to 3 years, all your equity is lost because it was such purely built and that is already falling apart. I remember going into this private development back in the day. I think it was like year 1 or year 2 of my judging. And as I was driving through, there was a big sign on one of the windows saying, "Don't buy one of these houses, they're rubbish." So tell me, is there anything can be done to regulate private developments?
Oh, right, okay. Can I go first then on this? And
Yeah.
so uh, uh, the private sector is a really, really important part of how we deliver into the future. And if I could remark on the previous question and span into this one about, because this is a question clearly about quality and about the future of quality and the sustainability of quality. I think the social housing, and we'll call it movement for a moment, the social housing movement or industry has been quality focused for a very long time. And I think the touchstone of the history of that ethic, if you like, of social housing providers, that's both in local authority context and in a registered social landlord context or housing association context, has been about taking places that have been failing due to quality. So we then take the decent home standard, for want of a better expression, about how people were living in substandard accommodation, the slum clearance history of the 60s and 70s, and then into the 80s, where it actually was about going beyond the peak of housing demand and homelessness to try to ensure that there was a place for everyone and it was a quality place. And that was a focus away from, if you like, high-rise living and stack them high, towards creating quality places, because there was a recognition, even by late 70s, early 1980s, that there was an absolute correlation between really good places and successful socioeconomic places, urbanisation, the mobility of people in terms of their opportunity to contribute to an economy because they've got a warm and dry affordable home. And I think we've got more and more sophisticated about that whole philosophy, particularly over the last 15 to 20 years. From a private sector perspective, there's always been a driver around price. How do we optimise quality relative to price, because there's a margin requirement. And that margin requirement goes back to the fact that many of them are PLCs and they have obligations to shareholders. And I suppose part of what we've been doing as an industry, holding the private sector to account, is to make sure that the idea about long-term quality, for the reasons that one has spoken about, we are taking a 60+ year investment view in any scheme that we're involved in, that we're going to be a community anchor that's going to be here for a long, long time. And we will outlive potentially the brand value of any one of those PLC providers that go in to build particularly low-cost home ownership, which has become a more prevailing product. The demand is on both sides, both the private sector side and the public and third sector side, particularly through the planning regime, to make sure that quality standards are not just maintained, that they are accelerated to a point where we minimise the level of defect and repair, and we maximise the consumer's appreciation of the thing that they're either renting or they have bought, because it's robust and it will last many life cycles. And that's the ongoing challenge, and it's a particular ongoing challenge, and we've been speaking a lot in recent terms to First Ministers and Housing Ministers about this issue, because at the heart of quality are things like the robustness of supply chains in the industry and their ability to train and develop particularly young people to come into a sector that is often seen as very difficult to work in, long hours, unforgiving weather, etc. And really, you've got a Gen Z population that might not necessarily feel they're attracted toward the construction industry. So we've got a bit of a selling to do of this industry, particularly to young people, to say there's a lot of job prospects in this, that you could have a really good standard of living and help us build places for the future. So that's my bit of a rant that includes quality, but it's also about learning and development. It's about creating an industry that will survive some of the pressures that have been put upon us because of COVID, Brexit, and things like the war in Ukraine, that have created a landscape that's very, very difficult to keep a workforce focused in this industry for the long term. And we're all running businesses. We need people who want to work in our industry and deliver good results.
Donna, it's not, so this is build quality, but it's also, I also noticed the social housing offers better spaces for the users. You go into private developments, they say, yeah, this is a 3-bedroom house. And all of a sudden is maybe 1 3/4 of a bedroom house. Well, if you go to a social housing, one of those beautiful flats we've seen this year, all the rooms are spacious. There is light coming through, is a much, much better living prospect.
I think the distinction is that, again, social housing developers will build to standards, including accessibility standards. So increasingly, I suppose one part of the work that we're doing is, working with social housing developers to look at actually how we future-proof homes, accepting that ultimately, you might move in, but you might spend 60 years here, and over time, as your needs change, how do you create a property that would actually allow you to be able to adapt to your living circumstances so that you could continue to call it your forever home? So I think there probably are space standards and design standards which are linked to that commitment to accessibility. But I think it's a really important point, because whilst there's a requirement for local authorities across Scotland to develop targets about the delivery of accessible homes and homes that have got great space standards and are well designed, it's predominantly social housing developers who will accept those standards. And increasingly, most people who are in homes that are not suitable for their needs are actually in the owner-occupied sector. They're in a market sector, and they are looking to purchase something which actually is more accessible and would allow them, to adapt to the age and stages as things change over time. So I think in terms of our colleagues in the private development sector, there's also a really important agenda there, which is about space, it's about accessibility. We've got an ageing population. There's a massive market for households who are looking to move into a property that will allow them to live independently and well into their old age, but actually the market's not offering a huge amount in terms of product that's tailored to that market. What I would say is we saw some good examples of it this year, however. Smaller to medium-sized builders who are absolutely, creating great accessible homes with huge space standards and really high quality environments. So it's out there, but as Tom said, I would guess that volume builders are under too much pressure in terms of commercial margins. If you're going to build something which is bigger, it's got a much hungrier footprint in terms of a site, there's less units, your margin drops. So again, a lot of this just comes down to development economics, I think.
And how is the cost of building affecting social housing then?
Okay, I could count on that. We're feeling the pain of that live and have been for the last couple of years. I can track back to 2016, being involved in another housing group at that time where we were able to command affordable housing purchase deals in a bandwidth of between the sub 100,000 to tops 120,000 a unit, all in, turnkey. We're probably now, as a sector, struggling to keep schemes below £250,000 a unit. And that's only in an 8-year period. That is an incredible acceleration of unit cost. And I think a lot of this is a legacy of some big drivers like Brexit, where we are a price taker of materials from Europe. More than 50% of the materials that the built environment concerns coming from Europe. They don't come indigenously from the UK, and more so from Scotland. So you're already got the barriers.
20%.
It's massive. And then you have the skills piece. So that's materials, and then you talk about people. You know, the situation that we have now, we know that whether you're a volume builder or a small to medium sized builder, you're struggling to keep a stable workforce across the key trades. And the result of that is massive wage inflation, where you've got quite rightly the tradesmen running around the country for the highest price. And I think part of what has to happen at a macro level is we need to have a much more joined up conversation about people supply chains with the further education, with schools, the further education sector, and perhaps create a much more of an emphasis around about those types of core skills and try to direct a lot more young people towards a lifestyle that could be part of the construction industry, whether it's blue collar or white collar. Because right now, what we are doing is something that's unsustainable, both in terms of material, but particularly in terms of labour.
Donna, anything we can do to keep this cost down, or is it a lost battle?
I would hate to think it was a lost battle. I think Tom's right. I think that there are absolute factors that we can have influence over, and I suppose skill shortages is one of them. And I think we need to get much better as a housing sector at making the economic case for housing. Scotland's economy will be massively impacted if there's a continued drop in the level of house building starts that we've seen over the past couple of years. So we need to do something about it. I mean, I think probably what we've seen, which I suppose in some ways kind of shows where we're at in terms of the social housing sector, is that, you know, social housing developers, for, you know, not all of them would have been in this category, but many of them will be taking a much more commercial approach to social housing developments. As Tom said, you know, previously, you know, there wouldn't have been too much concern over being able to develop a positive cash flow for a housing development, given the level of subsidy that might be available, you know, over a 30-year period, which is obviously could have a massive impact on that social landlord's business plan and all of the other important management and maintenance functions that they've got. I think what we're seeing now is many more social landlords who are actually looking at developments on a commercial basis, and actually, if they're not showing positive cash flows, even over longer extended periods of time, they're saying we can't afford to do it. And that's a significant worry. We've got over 170,000 people on waiting lists for affordable housing across the country. And actually, we need to try and find ways to enable development. And that's across all categories. Skill shortage is massive. Land reform, dare I say it, really, really needs to be looked at. But we also need to look at the economics of development. In the affordable housing sector, average rent will be £85 a week. If you've got a bill cost of 250,000, Tom, it's stretching things in terms of viability to a limit that's just not viable anymore. And I think that needs to be accepted, because, as Tom said, the delivery of good quality market housing, but also affordable housing, is not just the fabric of our society, it's a fabric of our economy. We need to ensure that our working age population, which is diminishing in the country, have got good quality homes and places to live so that they can grow the Scottish economy. So we need to make a case for more investment in housing, more support for housing developers, and absolutely, I suppose, try and reverse the trend of what's happening at the moment, which is actually we're seeing a build rate decline instead of increase.
But you know, brilliant points. If you don't want me to say so, Sarah, brilliant points that Donna's made there. I keep telling her she's good at politics, but she keeps ignoring them. But the reality of the situation is, this is not a demand side issue, all of this. This is a supply side issue. This is simply a factor of not building enough high quality affordable homes of any tenure. So not just about social homes or about mid-market rent, private rent schemes. It's about homes of any and all tenures. And I think one of the things that, in terms of the big think, that is really important, because we have to be having the big think. I remember, and Donna knows this, I remember I chaired the Housing Commission for RICS back in 2014, and I dug out the recommendations. There were 15 of them back then, those 15 things still prevail
Absolutely.
a decade on for me. And one of the things was was creating a housing conservatory to talk about and be thinking about the big think issues the government need to be facing into. I was delighted to read that one of my commissioners, Professor Duncan McLennan, has been appointed by the David Hume Institute to do a bit of work here around the actions required to transform the housing system in Scotland. And he is a particularly talented individual with a lot of time in the sector, not just here in Scotland, but around the world. And I very much look forward to the material that Professor McLaren is going to try to produce, because these are the big issues that need to be brought to the table that will signal to government there's some policy things you can control and you need to do them and you need to do them now. And there's some things that you need to do to influence the market. And here's what they are. Really important to have these conversations.
There
I
is a lot of.
agree.
Sorry, Donna, go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree. I think the other key thing to remember about Duncan is he's an economist.
Yeah.
So he'll make the economic case for housing, but he also advocates about thinking about housing as a system. And as Tom said, it's all connected. It's about a legacy of not building enough affordable and quality homes, as you say, not just in the affordable housing sector, but also in the market sector. And actually, probably design and architecture, I would suggest, does have a role and a part to play in that. Burns Road is a brilliant example of how to build really high quality housing with a density which could enable volume builds. But it's not a big example of actually what we're seeing private developers produce.
Absolutely.
And I think we actually probably need to highlight these examples as exemplars to say, look, this is the type of environment and accommodation and design that we need to start pursuing. There's a tendency to build, 4 or 5 bedroom homes, absolutely probably because the commercial margin on them is going to be most healthy. But actually, the aspect of our economy which is most at risk is those who, as Tom said, probably require something which is smaller, more accessible and more affordable. And we need to start thinking about how we actually design really high quality homes in places that create market appetite for that, but enable people to access what they need so they can participate in the economy.
Can I just add to that very briefly, Sarah? We took the First Minister very recently to one of his constituency areas in Perth, and my group chair and I, a place called Bertha Park, which is a northwest expansion of Perth. It's a venture between the landowner and, in this case, Springfield Properties and ourselves. It's a completely 10-year blend community. There's a complete blend of all house types there, from high-end outright sale to low-cost ownership, through to intermediate rent, private rent, and to social housing. And for me, it's a classic example of almost building a community from scratch. It's high-quality infrastructure led. So there's an essential part of this that's about communities coexisting. I think we've learned the lessons of not building the peripheral estates that are non-retaining quite a long time ago. And that's why actually the affordable product, because of to be honest, because of if you're under 40, the recent publication by Registers of Scotland have shown the massive increase in under 40s who can't afford to buy a home. So the piece of the generation rent that we were talking about 10 years ago, it's here now. There will be under 40s who will never be able to afford a home now because of the distance between what they're earning. Average rate of earning in Scotland now, median salary is about £38,500. That isn't going to get to touch the sides of a deposit for your average first-time buyer today. So what Duncan will hopefully bring through in his work is show the disassociation between earnings and affordability. The gap is getting bigger, and as a result, products that are probably built are going to be very important to the private sector because they'll need it to allow communities to economically be developed and be successful as part of a massive supply shortage.
There is also an element to be said about you build good homes, warmer homes, you create communities, and all of a sudden you've got NHS costs going down because people are healthier, care costs going down because the community take care of each other. So there is quite a lot of benefits in building good houses and not just looking at how much money can I make on a 2-bedroom flat. I was out with a architect friend for breakfast the other day, and she was saying to me that with their practice they do quite a lot of social housing. I'm trying to recruit her for Herald Property Awards 2025, by the way. She was telling me that some councils or housing associations, things like that, to keep costs down, and we already discussed all this incredible emergency of higher cost, but they ask architectural practices to work with a 1% commission project fees, 1%. And she said, that's not, we can't work at 1%. I wouldn't even cover my cost with 1%. So I've asked her, so who's actually doing it? She mentioned a couple of practices that still accept these conditions, but because they don't earn any money, there is no investment in new solutions. To save their time and their money, they keep something that worked for one thing and move it on to the next development because they can't afford to do anything more for 1% fee.
Absolutely.
It's such a difficult time for all the parties involved, isn't it?
I think
We want good architecture. We need good
I think we all do.
architecture.
Clients want great architecture. I think the fee tension is a product of the overall economic unit cost pressure that's been faced. I know from a client perspective, if we were traditionally procuring an entire design team, we would not be looking simply at how far can we get the percentage figure down for the overall design team cost. That's not the place that we start from. I think one of the things though that we do need to wake up to is there's not enough. I don't see enough in the tank, and I'm not trying to be critical of architecture here, and I say this as a quantity surveyor. I don't see enough of lessons learned about good design being reinforced into standard types of house, and enough standardization of detailing, etc. I think there's far too much reinventing the wheel going on in schemes, and that creates a time cost pressure on fees. I think the more we get to really high-end design that's based on very good standard details, the more we can get to a place where actually we can get a very efficient scheme in terms of overall fee, but still get very high quality in terms of design. Now, that's quite controversial for a design industry that is predicated on getting lots of fees for doing fantastic design. So, but I think there's an honest conversation to have with design teams about that thing in particular, about the learning circle around creating great places, great product. One of the things I would say about your health piece, health and housing, is absolutely so. I think there's a lot of research out there. We've got some Kingdom Group built the first passive house in the UK in 2010. Getting on now, 14 or so years ago, and we've done a lot of longitudinal health occupation analysis of that. And we know we've got customers in things like Passive House who have get rid of all the respiratory meds because they actually don't need them now because of the high quality of the environment that they're living in. So there's an absolute correlation between what's going on in health, in acute care and other expenditure, and what could be going on in great design in houses. And I only wish, therefore, and I have pleaded for this to the Housing Minister, that he has a conversation with the Health Minister about taking some of his health budget and putting it into better quality homes.
I agree. Less than 3% of social housing investment has a health component to it. And I think, as you say, Tom, the kind of health impacts are massive. They're significant in terms of reducing acute admissions, enabling long-term health and attainment. I think we don't make the case for housing well enough from a health perspective, from a community perspective, from an economic perspective. I think stats on the economic multiplier effect of housing I've seen everywhere from 6% up to 13%, but there's probably few economic activities that will have that type of impact, but we're struggling. So we need to kind of create, I suppose, the the influence that allows us to draw health in, that allows us to draw Scottish Government in, that allows us to bring affordable and private developers together so that we can start to create really good solutions.
One thing, just in case I forget about this, I like the cracking point again you made by Donna, back to Professor Duncan McLennan. Duncan's argument to me has been, and certainly was back in 2014 when he was on the commission, was that NHS, education and transport arguments are always better made than housing. And that's why their budgets have exponentially moved relative to the housing budget. So we need to be better at our impact arguments in this. If Mr. Stammer's, interviews of recent weeks have to be believed, we're going to face some significant austerity, over the lifetime potentially of this UK Parliament, which will have a significant impact on Scottish Government budgets.
Donna, we have already touched this topic slightly. You've already mentioned about aging population, and 4 or 5 bedroom houses are not really on demand anymore. Can you talk us through about how the demographics have changed and how that impacts social housing?
It's not just an impact in social housing, it's an impact on the entire housing system and all housing developers. So what we've got across Scotland is a decline in our working age population and a projected accelerated increase in households over the age of 65, but in particular over the age of 80. So there's a really kind of needs for great planning and really focused housing delivery, which looks at how we create solutions that allow us to retain our working age population, who are in many parts of Scotland completely disenfranchised, who are actually moving elsewhere because there are no housing options whatsoever available to them, but also looking at actually how we unlock movement in the housing system, because older households can actually leave a home that they've lived in for a long time and they've loved to access something which is equally good or better for their needs. So what we've got is this kind of static situation where older people are living in unsuitable homes. And I think a massive catalyst of that is the fact that they don't really have anything which is well designed or appropriate to move into. And particularly in the market housing sector, if we could create much better movement, we would release a significant proportion of homes that would meet the needs of the working age population and families. So we are missing a massive trick here. But I think the other thing that needs, and I'm not sure, and I'm sure they've got great market intelligence, but actually the private development industry really kind of understand the size and the scale and the appetite of this market, because actually commercially it could be a great success for them. But actually what we've seen is a movement towards, I suppose, standard types of, volume build product, if you like, which misses important client groups like that out. You do see good examples of it. I saw some great examples of it this year when we were judging entries. But I think it's a group that's overlooked, and I think we overlook it at our peril.
Very much so. We're at the start of a potential wave here now, this over 80s particular acceleration. We're one of the fastest growing ageing populations in Europe in Scotland now. And that statistic's been bubbling away for quite some time now. And a lower tax take base. And a lot of that is a factor of, notwithstanding Europe, a lot of that is a factor of having affordable places to stay that are economically connected to workforce places, and there needs to be a bigger conversation, particularly with the private sector deliverables around housing options, affordability. There's a massive pressure around rural and island communities as we accelerate urbanisation. The urbanisation we accept is happening all over the world. You're seeing people aggregating towards cities and away from other rural and island communities pretty much in every continent on the planet. But for us, in order to create a sufficiently diverse and robust economy, we need to be focusing on these places to make sure that they are survivable places. And we only do that if we start to look at housing as a key part of the infrastructure. And I don't think we talk enough about it like that. We talk about hospitals like that. We talk about roads like that. We talk about schools like that. But we don't really talk about housing like that as a system. And we need to have a grown-up conversation about how important housing really is to the survivability of places. And for all of us, especially as I'm heading towards my new retiral, especially towards we head into that moment as to what's it going to be like for us. And there's going to be an input of young people coming into these communities that will allow them to survive. We don't need to look too far back in history to see that we've created places that are now the subject of massive regeneration opportunity because we didn't plan for the long term enough about creating diversity in them.
I have a feeling Scotland is becoming more like Italy every day. See, when I moved in the UK 12 years, no, what's that? 13 years ago, I had one of the major cultural shocks I had was that I was living in Milan where all my friends were single and get into London where everybody was married. And all of a sudden I was the spinster in the company. So yes, and also in Italy, we have had this problem of aging population for a long time. We also had this problem of youngsters not being able to afford to buy a house, not actually being able to move out of the parents' house because the salaries weren't strong enough to support independence. And therefore, they get married later, they get kids later, and therefore they get less kids and all that jazz. So it's aging population, but also more of a single or young family or couples that we need accommodation for, or single moms or single parents is really that section in the middle where you are married or non-married or whatever, you got 2-3 kids and you need a 3-4 bedroom house. It's shrinking more and more every day, isn't it?
It's almost a bit like some of the pressure that I'm trying to put on my guys now in terms of looking at schemes and opportunities is to say, what if you set yourself the structure of saying this development has to be intergenerational and tenure blind? And if you make those two characteristics key to what the solution is, and I'm talking about that in anything that's over 30 homes in a development, if you started to create those disciplines for yourself, you would look at every single development you did completely differently.
Yeah. Donna, before we go, a piece of news popped into my feed the other day, and I think it's quite well connected to the Edinburgh event that I'm hosting, well, in Edinburgh, obviously, in the 3rd of October, where we talk about well-being. So we talked about well-being all this episode, actually, through houses. So one of the things we'll be discussing about on the 3rd of October is how companies can take better care of their employees. And your company has retained the Investors in People Platinum status. Well done. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. We're one of only 10 businesses of our size in the UK to have platinum, and we were absolutely thrilled this year to retain it. I mean, what I would say is that we pride ourselves on being a values-based business. So for us, it's absolutely focused on developing our people. We've got an incredibly strong workplace culture that has influenced, I suppose, how we onboard people, how we develop them. For us, it's about creating an environment where people feel ambitious to develop, but they also feel safe to make mistakes. And we've essentially used our values to design absolutely every aspect, from reward and recognition to how we collaborate, to how people learn and develop, to how they progress in their careers. It's probably the thing I'm most proud of in terms of my Neil Johnston career. And I would recommend everyone to go on that journey, because there is nothing more important to the success of a business or an organisation than to have highly engaged, really satisfied employees. So yeah, we were really thrilled to retain it.
Well done. Tom, anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
I'm very conscious of the fact that if my chairman listens to this podcast, I'm sure she shall, at one point, it would be remiss of me to know that we're also IIP accredited. And in recent times, in the last couple of years, we achieved a kind of UK first for IIP accreditation for young people. And we have a huge focus on the talent of the future, and the investors accreditation is very important to us. But congratulations to Donna, because Platinum's a it's quite a standard to not just reach, but to retain it is quite an achievement. So it says a fantastic amount about her focus on people being the centre of her business. People are definitely going to be the centre in the future of our business at Kingdom Glow.
Thank you very much for listening to Il Salotto Sessions. If you enjoyed the chat, please make sure you share with your friends and follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcast. For more information on our events, please visit ilsalotto.design and designpopup.com. You can also find us on Instagram _designpopup and Il Salotto Glasgow, as well as LinkedIn. Should you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions, please do get in touch. We would love to hear from you. Thank you.